So my pearl of wisdom today is not to be performative in your DEIJ work, but to be authentic, strategic, and purposeful in your DEIJ work. All right. Thank you, Kelly, Nancy, Zach, for providing me the opportunity to share today. Before I start, I'd actually like to begin with a land acknowledgement. As we are spread around the world, many of us have seen as First Nations peoples, Aboriginal peoples, and Indigenous peoples have struggled for their human rights, for past atrocities to be recognized and reconciled, and for historic land treaties to be honored. It is important, as we teach from a culturally competent and responsive perspective, that these peoples are recognized and given proper space in the curriculum. I am currently in Curitiba, Brazil, and I want to recognize that the original inhabitants of the land are the Tingui and Guarani peoples. As such, we acknowledge ourselves as guests on this land. And as guests, we have a collective responsibility to care for and preserve this land for generations to come, and to teach future generations regarding sustainability, preservation, and a love for all living things. So now on to my pearl. The idea of this pearl came to me last year at this time as I was sitting in my PTC course. I guess you could say it's been percolating for quite some time, much like the creation of a real pearl. We were speaking about current trends in education, and the topic of diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice, DEIJ, came up as a current trend in education. There was just something about the word trend that did not sit well with me that day and has bothered me ever since. We hear the word trend attached to such things as fashion, style, and food, but attaching it to human rights work made me uncomfortable. Social justice and human rights work is not a trend. Gender equity is not a trend. Indigenous rights are not a trend. Ensuring our LGBTQ plus students are safe is not a trend. My skin color is not a trend. There needs to be a shared understanding that DEIJ work has been going on for a long time. Pockets of resistance towards the dominant class and dominant ways of thinking have always existed, and in fact always will. With the deaths of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and many other Black Americans, and with the siege on Capitol Hill on January 6, 2021, we have seen a resurgence in DEIJ work on a global scale. Many international schools have taken notice of this global resurgence and undertaken diversity, equity, inclusion, and social justice work in their schools and their communities. As more and more international schools take on the important work around DEIJ issues, I want to offer some recommendations for those of you taking on the efforts to make change. I've got 4 points I'd like to cover. The first one, do the hard work of checking your bias and your privilege. This must be the starting place. Only by understanding your own bias and your own place of privilege can you then be prepared to support your students, colleagues, and community. We have spoken in this course already about bias in terms of being in classrooms, but I'm talking about bias that you may have towards marginalized groups, coming to terms with it, and educating yourself to move forward. All of us, even those from marginalized groups, bring some privilege to the table, depending on the space we are operating in. For example, I face barriers as a person of color. However, as a highly educated international leader, I have economic privilege that many others do not have. The privilege we hold can act as a blind spot when working with marginalized groups. It is critical before any real work is done around DEIJ that we start from a place of inner reflection, so then we can look outwards. Point number 2, policy and strategic plans. DEIJ work must flow from a place of policy. I firmly believe this. We can bring all the student voice we want, all the action plans, all the passion and desire to the work. Without the work firmly rooted in policy and strategic plans, you run the risk of everything falling apart. As we've probably already learned in many of our home groups and conversations in breakout rooms, leadership teams change, boards change, and with that, direction can change like the wind. So grounding the work in documentation is vital so that can live long-term. Third, curriculum. For the work to come alive and breathe, it must find its way into your curriculum. Too often, our curriculum comes from one lens. Even the authors mentioned in this course yesterday come from one demographic, yet we are a diverse group that work in international schools. As leaders, we need to give our teachers the tools to do DIJ work in terms of resources, but also providing the training so that they are comfortable talking about DIJ issues in their classrooms. Additionally, and much more importantly, this also means ensuring that your teaching staff know that you have their back. If they are questioned about DIJ themes by parents, they need to know that you will support them and go to bat for them. Fourth, and lastly, disrupt. This word might make some of you wince or cringe, but to quote Dr. Derek Gay, we need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Growth can only come when we are out of our comfort zones and when we can challenge each other in authentic ways. Coos and Posner tell us as leaders to challenge the status quo. Without disrupting the normal way of doing business, things will never change. We must remember the entire concept of international schooling was built on the premise of white, heteronormative, patriarchal, Eurocentric ways of thinking, knowing, believing, and operating. For this to change, disruption must occur. And other bodies of knowledge, other ways of seeing the world, other ways of operating, leading, and decision-making must be brought into the fold. So my pearl of wisdom today is not to be performative in your DIJ work, but to be authentic, strategic, and purposeful in your DIJ work. Our students, our teachers, our parents, and the communities we serve deserve it. Thank you.